All right, have you noticed this trend lately? Like, you'll see the story, it's all over the news, and then suddenly, what feels like, I don't know, just a few months later, you'll find, oh, it got turned into a movie. Today on the podcast, you'll hear why Hollywood is turning to recent news stories for movie ideas. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, the movie that I want to talk about, the movie that is the occasion for all of this, is called Dumb Money. It is based on the GameStop stock news story from a couple of years ago, actually from less than 2 years ago. Just to jog your memory super quickly, the GameStop story is essentially a story about how a bunch of amateur investors on Reddit, they banded together, they brought Wall Street to its knees. It was a pretty significant story when it happened, but it's also super recent history. Like, we're talking about 2021 rather. And now it's a movie that just premiered at TIFF a few days ago. Nate Joes of Vulture is here to talk about these news stories that end up becoming movies so fast. Nate, welcome to the show, man. How's it going?
It's going well. Thank you for having me.
Do you think they will turn this conversation into a movie? I can't tell.
Undoubtedly.
Okay.
Who would play you?
I don't know, actually. That is a thing to resolve later. But actually, before we get to...
I'm for Andrew Garfield for me.
I love that. You know what?
Yeah.
Dream no little dreams, pal. Listen, I want to start actually by situating us at TIFF, because Dumb Money premiered at TIFF, and you were in town to cover the Toronto International Film Festival. Yesterday, the People's Choice Award, which is like the big award at TIFF, it was announced. That went to Cord Jefferson's American Fiction. It's a story about a black author who's forced to re-examine what integrity means to him. What was your reaction where you're like, oh, American Fiction, that's the winner?
It was not surprise, I would say.
Not surprise.
I was in the premiere, and it was one of those screenings that just plays like gangbusters.
Yeah.
There would be scenes where you wouldn't hear half the dialogue because people were laughing so hard.
It's like a crowd pleaser of sorts.
Yes, it's a real crowd pleaser. And you can kind of tell near the end of the festival which movie they think is going to win because they start scheduling more screenings of it.
They add screenings.
And so you can kind of tell that it was maybe going to be American Fiction because there were a lot of American Fiction screenings sort of added at the very end. It's a fun win. It's a fun win. I think the critic Adam Naiman says that it's a movie that kind of pokes fun at the exact type of people who vote for the TIFF Audience Award, but they took it in good stride and they took it in good humor. You know, it's not a cruel movie. It's a very sort of gentle, fun movie, and it's not gentle, but like it's a humane movie, and everybody sort of gets to have their say and things like that.
I think what's remarkable about that prize, though, is that 14 of the last 15 winners of this award have been nominated for an Oscar. Of those 14, 13 ended up winning one. Do you end up seeing American Fiction in the same kind of lineage as those movies who end up taking home the big prize at the Oscars?
I think it has a shot. It's a little bit harder in some respects in that it comes from Cord Jefferson, who, as you say, it's his directorial debut. He is a former journalist like me. And, you know, it doesn't have the maybe cinematic heft of past winners.
Sure.
But it's a very fun movie, very fun. I expect it should compete in screenplay. You know, Jeffrey Wright is the star. He has somehow never been nominated for an Oscar before. He should have a shot in the actor race. And I think it could get into picture. Like, I think that's the record, is most of them get Best Picture nominations. And I don't think it's guaranteed, but I think if they run a smart campaign, and MGM, I think, has fewer resources than other places, but not, you know, a tiny indie. Yeah, it has a shot, I think.
Okay, so now let's talk about the reason we are gathered here. Okay, let's talk about these news stories that end up becoming movies. I do want to play you a bit of the trailer of Dumb Money. Let's hear some of that right now.
Yo, what up, everybody? Roy and Kitty here. I'm going to pick a stock and talk about why I think it's interesting, and that stock is GameStop.
I will tell you, I've never seen anything like it.
Is the craziest I think I've ever seen.
Everything okay?
$11 million? What the
Oh, language. The baby's here.
Nate, first of all, that was a fun trailer. But the thing is, like, the crazy thing about Dumb Money is that the movie is coming out about a year after Dumb Money, the book, came out. And that came out less than a year after GameStop, the actual GameStop story itself happened. To me, that's nuts. Is there any kind of precedent for this turnaround in terms of going from news story directly to film?
Yeah, the thing I always think about is All the President's Men, which, you know, Watergate break-in happened 72. Nixon resigned 74. Somehow the movie's out 76, which is, wham, wham, bam. The movie itself, though, doesn't go up until the resignation. The movie only sort of goes up until, I think, early 73. So it's about 3 years. And I was doing some research, and there are like 2 movies recently that have been that sort of same time frame, but usually it's about 3 years. It's Zero Dark 30, which they kind of had to, the movie about the hunt for Osama bin Laden, which they had to rewrite the ending of once they actually caught bin Laden.
Yes.
And Bombshell, which was the movie about, the Roger Ailes sexual harassment scandal at Fox News, which came out in 2019, about 3.5 years after that scandal. So it's usually like 3.5 years is the quickest time it takes. This is like 2.5 years. Right. So it's remarkably quick. I think they were helped in that the book rights sold to Hollywood before the book was even finished written. Like it was sold off a proposal. Everybody was sort of circling this. There were tons and tons of projects and TV shows and movies just trying to sort of, get their bite at this story. And so whoever got it was going to have to work really, really quickly. And so that's what they did.
So when I saw the trailer, I think my initial reaction was like, wait, already? And I think a lot of people are having the same kind of reaction to be like, they turned that news story into a movie that fast. But there's a big reason that Hollywood tends to pounce on these headlines with this kind of speed. What is that reason?
Yeah, it's that when it comes to real life things where it's like not a comic book or, a toy, anybody can take a crack at it. And so because anybody can take a crack at it, there's so much competition. I was talking to the filmmakers behind Dumb Money, and this had happened to them before they made Dumb Money. They tried to make a movie about the Chippendales, sort of this tawdry tabloid scandal around Chippendales from like the 90s. And they got beat out by a Hulu miniseries. So it was fresh in their minds that like, if you were trying to make a story based on real life events, it's good to make a great thing, but you kind of have to make a fast thing. That's the most important quality.
Is there any kind of, when you think about like the idea of making this really fast, it's because the dramatic elements are kind of automatically there and people already have an emotional connection, I guess, with the story. But is there something to your mind about something that is lost when we focus so hard on all these pre-established intellectual property stories, right? The idea of like, oh, well, everybody knows the story, so everybody will go see the movie. What do you think is lost when we do these?
Yeah, I think sometimes you miss a little bit of context. I think you miss a little bit of nuance. The director, Craig Gillespie, has, as you said, a very sort of emotional tie to it, is that in that his son was one of those Redditors who was betting on GameStop and going up against Wall Street. And so he had, he had a first eye view. His son was quarantined with him during COVID. Yeah. So he was seeing all these emotional ups and downs. But then because of that, the movie is very much like the Redditors' take. And it's playing straight, like we are the Redditors, we're the plucky underdogs, and Wall Street are the mean guys. And and at the time, that was kind of the narrative that was going out. In the weeks afterwards, there was some reporting out there that was like, oh, maybe the story is a little more nuanced. Maybe the story is a little more complicated. Yeah. And that's the kind of thing you miss, and you also sort of miss the complexity, right? Like the Redditors in early January 2021 were not the only people online who were convinced like these shadowy elites were manipulating the truth and like trying to keep things from happening. And so they got to, take matters into their own hands. Yes. And, maybe a movie that was had a little more time to breathe could kind of explore those interesting similarities. Yeah. But this movie, it's just kind of like bam, 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 bam. And they kind of can't. It's like a fun movie. I like it, but they can't sort of draw out any of those like more thorny complexities.
So you watched the movie. So it's, it's got Paul Dano, it's got Pete Davidson, Seth Rogen in there for some time. I hear not very long. How factual is this movie?
It's about half and half. Okay. So Paul Dano's character is the guy Keith Gill, who is the guy kind of leading this charge. Yeah. And that stuff is fairly factual. The real Keith Gill is sort of not quite reclusive, but he doesn't do press really. So they had to fill in a lot of the gaps. And then I think my understanding is that most of the other sort of Redditor characters are all composites. There is a nurse played by America Ferrera. There is a GameStop employee played by Anthony Ramos. And they are sort of meant to be just like everyday people representing, representing the common man. And then the hedge fund bad guys are like actual real guys. And, a lot of that stuff, like one of them has a pet pig and that is documented. The guy actually does have a pet pig living in his house. And then... Yes.
Oh, continue. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, yes. And then at the end of it, it sort of climaxes with this big congressional hearing. And that is taken almost entirely from the actual record. They use the actual, because it was the quarantine, they use, it was all over Zoom. So they just use the actual Zoom footage. So you have, AOC looking into a Zoom camera and being like, your mic's muted, which is, from the actual hearing itself.
I guess when I started to think about this story, I started to think about what else could they keep doing this with? And because there's something to be said about the fact that Hollywood is not going to stop this particular strategy. How do you see this strategy playing out in the future?
I think it's only going to get more intense in that we, for better or worse, often for worse, we live in the IP era.
Yes.
We live in a world where it's very hard to get people to take a chance on an original story. Even when you think about like the two big bright lights of this year in cinema, which are Barbie and Oppenheimer, they kind of have some sort of pre-built-in fan base in them.
You already know at least.
Yes, you already know what's going on. Yeah. Yes, and I think that's why we're seeing projects like this. It's like, okay, like nobody's going to buy an original story about something you made up because people aren't going to, they don't know if there's a buy-in there, but they know there's sort of automatic buy-in. They're like, oh yeah, remember that thing from 2 years ago? Like, now it's a movie. Yeah. I think it's only going to get, I don't want to say worse because I don't think it's outright negative. I think it's just a thing that is. So I think it's just only going to get more popular.
My nightmare becomes the other way around, which is when we start to rely on movies in order to understand the news stories of like 18 months ago or 2 years ago, because then we're in like really damaging territory. But Nate, we're out of time, man. I just really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Of course. Nate Jones is a senior film and pop culture writer for Vulture magazine. Dumb Money is in theaters right now. By the way, the film's director, Craig Gillespie, is going to be on Q next week, but I do want to play you some of the chat that he had with Tom Power right now. Here he is talking about the GameStop story.
It happened to be that GameStop became like the perfect mouthpiece for this frustration. It happened to be that it was a stock, but in the way that people could have an opportunity to make money, they could have an opportunity to be heard. And there was this collection of people, on Wall Street Bets, it went from 400,000 people in 8 weeks to 8 million people. And they really wanted these 1%ers, or in many cases these 0.01%ers, to know how frustrated they were. And this was the way to do it.
Craig Gillespie directed Dumb Money, and you can hear that whole chat with Tom Power next Tuesday, September 26th on Q. I'm Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Listen, there's a value village that I walk by all the time in downtown Toronto, and I recently learned a neat bit of history about it. I learned that if you went into that building around 30 years ago or so and went upstairs, you might have seen this going down.
I'm on a cross-cut song. Let me just drag me across the lawn. I'm a cross-cut song. Let me just drag me across the lawn.
All right, so what you're hearing there is a voice of Memphis blues singer Cousin Dennis, better known as Dennis Graham. Better known, probably best known as Drake's dad right now. He's singing on stage at Albert's Hall. Albert's Hall is this legendary blues club that was open for 2 decades and then shut down in the 90s. But the thing is, that performance that you're hearing right now, it was filmed from a local television program called Stormy Monday. And the reason that you're hearing it right now is a few days ago, it popped up on Drake's Instagram. Drake used that clip to announce the release date of his new album, For All the Dogs. But he didn't just pull this video from his family archive. No, in fact, Drake had only seen this video of his dad performing for the first time just a few days before he shared it with his millions of followers. Over the weekend, we heard Drake has delayed the release of his new album. Turns out it's not going to come out this Friday. He's going to push the date to October 6th. But that's not going to stop us from talking about this story because we want to talk about how that video ended up in Drake's hands. He's got Daniel Tate to thank for that. Daniel Tate is a Toronto-based music historian who created a popular Instagram account called The Flyer Vault, which is an amazing archive of local rave flyers and concert posters. He's with me now. Daniel, what's good, man?
Hey, man. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
I'm so happy that you're here. It sounds like we're going to have to wait a little bit longer for this new Drake album, but that's fine. Let's talk about how this video ended up in your hands before you passed it on to Drake.
Yeah, so I work on several music history projects at any given point in time. And for this particular story, I was actually at Robarts at U of T doing research for an Aerosmith project, which is
Nice.
completely unrelated, but so I'm there doing this Aerosmith project, and I started going through the old Now magazine archives. Now, everybody who grew up in the 80s and 90s and 2000s remembers every Thursday Now magazine would come out, and that would really tell you what was going on in the city. And so
Yeah.
I was researching for Aerosmith. I was trying to find like old photos, concert views, stuff like that. And I was just pouring through the entertainment listings, and I was just like really taken aback at all these blues and R&B clubs that were happening all throughout the city, and one in particular, which was Albert's Hall.
Yeah.
And I couldn't help but notice a name that kept greeting me on these pages, Dennis Graham.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I know Dennis Graham. That's Drake's Pops. And so that was sort of the catalyst that took me down another rabbit hole. And I started doing more research on Dennis's history and the history of the Toronto blues scene. And dominoes started falling after that.
Okay, so we're talking about this Toronto blues scene. This is a very Toronto-centric sort of story. You know, it's around venues like Albert's Hall. That's where guitarist Danny Marks hosted this weekly televised jam. It's called Stormy Monday. And I understand that even before you went on this deep dive into trying to figure out, you know, where Dennis Graham was at, this was a scene that you were kind of intimately familiar with at the time. What is your connection to the story?
Yeah, so my father actually was an avid blues fan. And I remember when I was a kid, 92, 93, I'm about, 12, 13 years old. And my dad would always be going downtown, going to the Silver Dollar, going to Grossman's, going to Albert's Hall, and just like losing himself in blues music. And he would come home and he would play all these CDs that he would pick up at these shows. And it's crazy because when this story came out, I actually spoke to my father last week, and he remembers listening to Dennis Graham on stage. He remembers Danny Marks. So it's one of those crazy stories where I'm doing research and then it kind of comes full circle back to me.
So it's one thing for the name to keep popping up while you're in the middle of the University of Toronto Library. It's another for you to get your hands on the actual footage of Dennis performing on Stormy Monday. How did that happen, man?
Yeah, so basically, I would leave the library. My mind is just like buzzing with ideas and thoughts, and I'm thinking, maybe there's more here. And so, just on a whim, I reached out to this guy named Gary Kendall, who's like pretty well known in the blues scene in Toronto. He booked the Silver Dollar. He's done a lot for the scene. And just on a whim, I emailed him. I'm like, hey, does the name Dennis Graham ring a bell to you? Do you recall he used to play around town for a few years? And it was like automatic. He's like, oh, yeah, of course I know Dennis. He was in the scene. He played, great guy. He had a smooth, velvety voice.
Yeah.
And I'm like, damn, I'm unlocking memories, even out of Gary. And then so Gary basically said, yeah, I'm gonna CC these people and those people who also played with him. And then so what started as an email thread of just me and Gary ended up with like 12 people on it, and we're all just like pollinating memories of Dennis and the scene, until finally someone said, hey, you got to reach out to this guy because I think he even has a tape of him.
Wow.
And then I was like, ooh-wee. Gonna chase down that rabbit hole.
That's wild because like you would think it's not like Dennis Graham's identity as Drake's dad is like a hidden secret. Like you would think people would have just thought to have done this over the last, I don't know, however long Drake has had a career, like 15 years or so.
Yeah, but maybe for the older musicians like that generation, they don't look at it that way. They don't look at it like, we were jamming with Drake's dad. They don't look at it that way. They look at it like, we had this guy Dennis amongst all these other awesome musicians, and we were just rocking and rolling together. And maybe they don't even remember like that. Dennis's son became this huge global superstar. So I think that's
they don't even
where
necessarily
I
make the
came
connection.
in.
I see.
Right. So that's where I came in. I'm sort of the glue to like bring it all together, kind of bridge the gap between the generations.
Okay, so now you have this video in your possession, and then you send a DM to Drake, who follows your account. Your account is at the Flyer Vault. Are you telling me that Drake checks his DMs? Like, what happened? You sent this DM, and then what happened?
Just to rewind a little bit. So I took the subway out to High Park to some house and I'm sitting in this guy's basement. His name is Alec, and let's just say I get goosebumps when I see this video.
Right.
And he's basically telling me that this tape has been sitting in his basement for 32 years gathering dust.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Yeah.
So essentially it's like if I didn't make this happen, nobody ever would have seen it, which is crazy to even think about. And so I'm watching it. He's such a nice guy. He digitizes it for me. He airdrops to me. And so like now I got it on my phone and I'm basically the second view.
Right.
Right. It's like
it's him and then
me.
you. Yeah.
Total number of views, 2.
Yeah.
And so at that point, I'm like, all right, the right thing to do is to give it to the family. Right. And who's the family? Obviously, that's Drake. And I'm sure he would love to see it. And so, yeah, it's just like I DM'd him. And I was like, I hope you see this. You're going to want to see this. Fingers crossed. And lo and behold, and he saw it, and then he was flipping out.
I can absolutely totally imagine. You had no idea that Drake was going to do anything with the video after you sent it to him, but then a few days pass, and then he decides that he's going to announce his new album by posting that video. How did you find out about that? Like, what went down there?
That was another crazy story. So, so it's Wednesday. I'm at Bud Stage. I'm watching the Alice Cooper Rob Zombie concert with my 2 buddies, which is already like insane. I've never seen Alice, god of rock and roll, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm watching Alice and I'm videotaping or on my phone, and all of a sudden my Instagram's blowing up. I'm like, what's going on? Why am I getting like, follower, and like messages, blah, blah, blah. I have no idea what's going on because I'm in the rock mode. We go to there's an intermission. We go upstairs to like the bar just to chill and have a drink. I check my phone. I'm like, what's going on here? And I'm like, damn, Drake posted the whole video, tagged the Flyer Vault. Very nice of him to do. He didn't have to do that.
Yeah.
To announce the release date of the record. And I was just blown away. I was on cloud 10 at that point.
Well, that sounds incredible, man. Well, I really appreciate you being here to clarify the story, to tell us about how this video came into your possession. I love that you and Drake have an open DM policy. That sounds fantastic. Thanks so much for being on the show today, Daniel.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Of course, man. Daniel Tate is a Toronto music historian behind the Instagram account The Flyer Vault and co-author of the book of the same name. Drake's new album comes out next month.
Y'all don't need love. You need somebody who could micromanage you, you know what I'm saying? Tell you right from wrong, who's smart from who's a fool, which utensil to use for which food, like... I got a schedule to attend to, though. I can't really.
You really get carried away, making mistakes, then you beg me to stay. Got me wigging on you like I'm arrogant. You got my mind in the...
That's a bit of Drake's new single, Slime You Out. I should tell you, by the way, the song's great and everything, but the big topic of conversation has been the cover art for the single. It's like this photo of Halle Berry covered in slime. It's from the 2012 Kids' Choice Awards. But the controversy is this: Halle Berry posted on Instagram that Drake's people asked for her permission to use a photo, and she said no, and she says Drake used it anyway. Halle Berry called it disrespectful. That album, For All the Dogs, out October 6th.
She looks in the mirror, she don't like what she sees. She's got a hunger she can't seem to feed.
My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud, and you are listening to Commotion. Listen, before I let you go, I just wanted to say a big congrats to the winners of this year's Canadian Country Music Awards. The song you're hearing right now, that's Dying to Be Beautiful, Tennille Townes. Tennille was one of the big winners of this year's CCMAs. She picked up 3 trophies, including Female Artist of the Year. I don't know if you caught the awards, but she also performed with Pat Monahan of Train. They got a new single called I Know, and also a rendition of Train's song from 2012 called Drive By. The other big winner this year's awards is Jade Eagleson, who also picked up 3 awards. He won Entertainer of the Year and Male Artist of the Year. For more of the winners, check out CBC Music. And that is it for our show today. My name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Hey, I'm going to see you tomorrow. Have a good day.